Let's connect what we do on a day-to-day basis to business risk, understand the value in what we are suggesting we do, and then execute a uniform plan cross-functionally, generally.
Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by an industry expert today, Steve Lomax, who I actually met in person at the Mainstream event in Birmingham way back when. It was sometime last year. I mean, I've forgotten everything that happened towards the end of last year. Was it in November, Steve? I think
October. I think it was October. Yeah, great event. Yeah. Really, really good event. Yeah,
and it was. Couldn't agree more. Fantastic conversations. Met. Richard Jeffers we were talking about just before, friend of the podcast as well. And it was a fantastic event. But we had a quick chat there and we realised that actually it'd be great to have Steve on with his background, which I'll let Steve explain. But what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about reliability and predictive maintenance, maybe in regulated plants, and just get Steve's perspective on that, what he's seeing in his industry in his sort of new role, I guess, as an independent consultant. And we'll just see where the conversation takes us. I'm sure there's going to be lots of value shared today. But before we do that, Steve, over to you. Let us know a bit about yourself and your background. It'd be fantastic.
Thanks, Niall. So I'm 53 years old. For anyone who knows what I look like, surprised by that, I've had a hard life in my defence. I started my professional career when I was 16 years old as a time-served electrician in petrochems. Did a couple of years of that, moved out of that into some contracting, and then kind of quickly moved into pharmaceuticals, which has then formed the backbone of most of my career. Early on in pharma, I'm multi-skilled, and I started to look at this. What's this leadership thing? What's this? Getting involved with other things. And as soon as I took that step forward, I was quite surprised at how blink it had been, just on the tools and just doing what was in front of me. And I've never lost that sense of excitement that came within me at that time. So in pharmaceuticals, I've very much grown as an individual, grown as a leader, and I've ended up working at different plants, higher levels, different areas of responsibility. So quite well-rounded in pharma. And then ultimately and relatively recently deciding to leave the corporate world and go out on my own as a consultant, as you alluded. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. There's lots of water under the bridge, and perhaps we'll talk about some of that today,
No, fantastic. And it's great to have, we have a lot of people who are very, not called generalists, but across lots of industries. But I'm really pleased today we've got someone who's very, very focused, let's say, on the pharmaceutical industry and what we can learn from there. And I mean, what I wanted to start with is, the topic of predictive maintenance. And first of all, what your definition of it is, Steve, maybe with the sort of pharma hat on as well, because from my experience, if someone mentions predictive maintenance, you ask 100 people, you're going to get 100 different answers, potentially. And so I'd love to get your perspective on that. And what problems are we trying to solve with predictive maintenance in regulated industries like pharma?
All right. There's an interesting opener. Okay. Predictive maintenance, look, it's the great panacea, isn't it? It's as you said, it's different things to different people. I think what people are trying to cure, what they're trying to fix when they say predictive maintenance, is uncertainty. For any business, whether it be highly regulated or whether it be, regardless of the industry, in fact, we're looking for stable processes, and any uncertainty, or let's talk about reliability, any poor availability or reliability in equipment leads to uncertainty. It's a lack of stability. And what we try and do with predictive maintenance is make our spend predictable, make our process reliable, and we try and connect engineering decisions to business risk. I think that's one of the key things for me. There's no such magic wand as predictive maintenance. That's it. We're going to know everything all the time. We know what maintenance we need to do. We can get really, really good at it. We can get really, really close so that unexpected failures are really a rare thing. But we're never, ever going to be 100%. It's what we strive for. But I think it's that let's connect what we do on a day-to-day basis to business risk, understand the value in what we are suggesting we do, and then execute a uniform plan cross-functionally, generally.
And is that still something that's how it's sometimes positioned in organisations as sort of, maybe maintenance more generally as sort of a cost centre, rather than something you can connect to the overall business objectives? Is that still?
It's a strange one. Look, we know maintenance engineering is a thorn in the side of many businesses because we're generally quite expensive. Generally, maintenance departments represent the big variable spend on site. And every site is different. So it's a real difficult one to badge, and it is definitely site or business specific. From my experience, because I've worked in such regulated industries, we absolutely know maintenance is essential. The level of maintenance, however, and how that equates to equipment availability is often lost. And that tends to be costed in terms of USD or GBP. There is a fiscal cost to it, but also a cost in terms of the business's ability to meet customer demands. And if you think about pharmaceuticals, we're talking about us, we're talking about patients now, a positive impact in people's lives. So that's why that whole risk reward thing is really, really very, it's looked at a lot, I think, in pharma particularly.
And I guess before, even if we take a little bit of step back, from predictive and sort of a data-led approach. So I guess what the starting point is, or maybe you could, explain the starting point maybe a little bit more, but the shift from, because you have to start from sort of maybe reactive fixing to predictive, and there's maybe a gap in between. But so how, what's the trigger to actually get to that point? You mentioned business outcomes, it may be around that, but
yeah, that's a good question. So look, that thing is going to be different again for every site. But actually, and if I'm talking from a personal experience of mine, generally, if you look at a pharmaceutical process, not a new process now, an established process, it grows, it's organic, it grows over time. You have issues, you investigate those issues, you put in corrective or preventative actions, CAPAs, and the process, or what we do around the process, tends to grow a little bit organically. And then something will happen. And that thing that happens, it might be a near miss, or there might be a failure or an issue. And all of a sudden we realize just how fragile our process is. And it's at that point, that's the trigger. So generally it's a necessity, but also that first visibility of fragility in your process. We're talking about, in highly regulated industries, very expensive processes normally. Cost of failure is incredibly high, both in terms of customer delivery and in terms of raw materials that go into the process if you were to make things that were then to subsequently fail and not be saleable. So when you appreciate that fragility, or when you see that necessity, that is the point at which you have to change. And the last several sites that I've worked on or worked around, it's been the same for them, for sure.
And it's interesting what you were saying, because you've mentioned this phrase a couple of times, Steve, per site. And I know with Senseye, we've got customers who've rolled out predictive maintenance globally across all sites. It's a real across organisational shift. But you're talking in terms of per site. I'm just wondering your perspective on that. Is that your experience where things are done very much per site and implemented per site?
Yes and no. So global organizations, you have a global framework, global standards generally, and those global standards are driven by the regulatory requirements from potentially all over the world. And they try to be all things to everyone, which they can't be. So therefore, each site has to interpret those parts of the global standard that's relevant to them, which means that you have some broad standardization site to site. Certainly in engineering practices, we can define quite easily what engineering best practice is from site to site, depending on the business. But also there is some geographical or country-specific regulations, or perhaps even some financial considerations or considerations around what element of the business are we actually executing on this one site. So it is, even with an established global entity that's been around for many years and has, a good global presence and some established practices, they deliver strongly to the customer, you'll see great variation from site to site, simply because not every site can be the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, when you say every site can't be the same, is it because maybe they're in different, well, maybe literally in different stages of their, let's say, digital transformation journey, or maybe the sites with different ages, different equipment? Is that, I guess, just to open up a little bit more?
Yeah, very much so, and different types of equipment as well. So API, active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer, is very different from formulation, filling and packaging of that equipment. And if they're done on different sites, then perhaps your requirement for digital transformation would be different. Simpler equipment, perhaps less of a need. More complex equipment, more of a need. So it does very much vary on both geography and what goes on each site.
And maybe, again, sort of leaning in on the predictive maintenance side. So maybe that also means not necessarily you should roll out the same approach to every site, right? Every site should be treated as a different deployment. Is that, I guess, what we're saying?
Yes, and it depends. It depends what you're deploying as well. So I guess the question behind the question is, how do we manage deployment of a global platform? Okay, so if we were going to deploy a global platform, I mean, it's quite straightforward, isn't it? You just deploy it. You tell every site you're going to do it, and you're going to deploy it. And then every site is going to do their own thing. You're going to have this global platform that we all use differently. And actually, as a global entity, some of the value that we saw was we could look at which sites and understand where we need to put our capital expenditure. And now we can't, because everyone's using it differently. So really, it's around data maturity. It's around scope of implementation and what goes where. And it's around, if you were doing this globally and over time, and if you were piloting it particularly, making sure you don't sell the pilot as right, we're going to do the pilot, great, we've implemented the pilot, now we can relax. No. That's the time to ramp up. And let's keep a core team of people now, a core team of people that moves from site to site and delivers the project. But behind that, let's ensure, before we even press the green button, do we have the right data maturity levels? Do we have the right scope for each site? So as a project, we understand exactly what's going to be used and where. If you get that right, everything else will follow.
And I guess it's interesting you mention things like, data maturity, etc. But I guess another aspect of this is also the cultural maturity. I don't know if that's the right term, or even we could even position it in a different way, in terms of, the cultural shift required, both at sort of shop floor level and, let's say, leadership board level as well. I mean, can we talk through that a little bit, the importance?
So if we were moving to digital and away from paper, for instance,
yes, exactly.
Okay, so kind of an amusing story from my past. I worked on a site where they had just implemented CMMS, very basic but decent. It was a well-known CMMS. It was used with a light touch, but it added significant value. And I was talking to one of the planners there, and what you're going to do with all your filing cabinets now, with all your maintenance data in, and we're going to keep them there. Oh, okay, that makes sense, and you're going to archive them, say, after a year. Well, no, because we'll keep adding the records to it. I was sorry. Yeah, well, we'll keep adding. They were doing the maintenance digitally, printing the record out, signing it, and then filing it. So wow. In one swoop, detracting all the value that you're likely to gain from your nice digital process that you've just created. And the problem there stems from, especially in highly regulated industries, wet ink signatures are seen as the gold standard. Everyone likes a piece of paper. The problem is pieces of paper get lost, they get damaged, they get misplaced. And if you're highly regulated and are unable to produce when being audited that piece of paper, that puts you in a world of hurt. So one of the cultural changes, I think, or the key cultural change, is cross-functionally making sure that people understand the benefits of digital media and how, if we were to talk about the US 21 CFR part level compliance, that standard for digital compliance and digital signatures, actually a digital signature is as good, if not better, than a wet ink signature. It says that me, Steve Lomax, on this date with my unique log on, did do this activity. And that's proof that's as good as me signing a piece of paper to say I did it. In fact, it's better, because every keystroke I made to make that change is auditable and it's logged. And therefore, you as an auditor or you as a quality person has access to all that data. And it's never lost. It's always backed up. You can't lose it. And I think when you sell the why in terms of how it benefits each individual function, and if you can do that cross-functionally even better, then actually digital transformation starts to take care of itself. It starts to snowball.
Yeah, and I guess there's different levels of this as well. In terms of that's a fantastic example as well. But then I guess if you build the layers on top, it's also the insights itself. Trusting the insights often. Is this telling me what I know this machine better than any tool can? So again, that's part of the journey as well, is actually putting trust into tools. Or is that something that isn't an issue as much?
Yeah, look, our data has to be, in order for data to be credible, it has to be accurate and transparent and relevant. And if you were a maintenance technician and I was a quality person, what would be relevant to you would be different perhaps to what is relevant to me. But there will be some crossover. However, if cross-functionally, you and I sit and we agree that here's the core of what we need, and here's the little bit that I need and the little bit that you need that goes on top of that. We've now got a common approach to what's required. If we assure accuracy and transparency, and we can find that information whenever we want, bingo, almost perfect world, and never forget that highly regulated industries, and I mentioned this before, when things grow organically, your data grows as well. You end up with more data sources, you end up with more information, sometimes too much when it comes to making decisions that are outside the norm. Simplicity is the key. Let's pare it back. Let's understand what's actually the data that we need to look at. And you talked about Senseye before, and I guess there's other systems out there. Siemens Senseye obviously is probably one of the most established. This is the perfect forum now for that sort of system, because, hey, I'm going to look at your data and I'm going to tell you some things. Now, that's a great and powerful tool, and with the advent of AI, we're seeing more and more how those decisions can be not made for us, but laid out in a manner that now we can make meaningful decisions. And use a maintenance tech and me as a quality person, it's explained for both of us. Our expertise is still required. AI doesn't know everything. Richard Jeffers said this, I think, mainstream actually. We are many years away from AI being able to do our jobs. Thank goodness.
Exactly. I hope that's the case for marketing as well, to be honest. But I mean, certainly to your point. I mean, we've always positioned Senseye. I can only speak for Senseye, but other tools as well. But as a decision support, it's not there to replace judgment. Expertise like yourself or others. It's there simply to lay out certain facts and certain recommendations, and then it's ultimately up to the maintenance person or whoever it might be to make that decision based on their own knowledge and the AI's guidance. So that should always be the principle. As we speak now, let's come back in 20 years and see where we are. But I wanted to touch on the data point as well, because I've done many interviews on this podcast and spoken to a lot of people at events, etc. And there's obviously a big push over the past 10, 15 years or maybe longer to collect as much data as possible. Our Industry 4.0, let's add sensors, let's get as much data as possible. So I guess if someone's thinking about any sort of digital transformation project, predictive maintenance or whatever, but it must be quite confusing. Do we need to install lots of new sensors, get more data? Do we look at our existing data? And I think you've sort of answered the question a little bit before, Steve, but just we could go into that as well, because often there's a big, we need to invest in loads of sensors now to start all this. Right?
Yeah, and if you were to go to a condition monitoring company, for instance, maybe vibration analysis, someone who's they're better these days, but when they were in their infancy, they would come to you and say, we're just going to put sensors on everything. So now you're overloaded with data, and you get so much data and so much noise, you do nothing with it. Start with the data that you already generate. That's absolutely key. What is the data that we have currently telling us? So where are our pain points? Where are our bad actors? Let's use the data we've got, and then we can make a decision on, do we need more data for those particular areas? But you would never ever start from a position of, we've got this new system, where can we apply it? You would always start from, what do we have, and do we need to apply anything, or is there work we can do with the information we have?
No, exactly. And it's the type of approach, and we have at Senseye, we have something called the scoping workshops. You may have been involved in, actually, where you look at the types of assets, you look at the data, and most importantly, actually, what use cases and what problems are you trying to solve? These things need to be known first, rather than just a blanket. Let's get this cool tool installed and see what happens, right?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And sometimes we see, like with Senseye, we see the value of the tool in its potential, and we don't see how that will relate. And this is probably particularly true of pharma. We're going to put it on a piece of kit perhaps has never been used before, and that's the time where, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got, right? Now it's the time to use a new tool in a very limited fashion to show us perhaps what is possible across the rest of the process. And there's huge value in that too, but you do it carefully, and you do it on small scale, and you apply it in a known manner, and then you sit back and you look at the data, and you talk to the Senseye guys, and you work out what it's telling you, and you might need to add a sensor or take one away, or because the process, the system itself, is going to be learning our process, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It definitely does. And I guess following that, started the pilot, and we talked about just then the importance of setting, what are you actually trying to solve here? Not, get more visibility on the machine, but what's the bit, is it downtime as an example? But I guess then the question is, how do you turn a figure like reducing downtime into a figure that someone at the C-level or CFO, let's say, would understand, would understand it from their point of view? And you talked about quality and, was it reliability, having different perspective. But again, it's about translation, right? As I see it.
Exactly right. And the chief financial officer, he's never going to be happy, But if you as a reliability guy, if I can put the context of what I'm delivering, or if we've actually improved availability by 10%, he has a figure for that. He already knows it. If it's an established business, he has metrics and defined parameters for what the business health looks like. He knows what the P&L looks like. It's then quite easy for you to show how you've changed or the impact you've had on that, and put it in the language that he understands. And that's really quite important, because the language that he uses is the language that then goes to group, and it's how the site's measured. So it's really quite important that we as reliability folk, if we are going to badge what we do in any way at all, other than the information that we use between us, when we're looking at painting a picture of what we've done, which I think is what you're talking about, what's the actual value of what we've just done? We installed Senseye. What value did it give us? Well, actually, it gave us a 5% improvement in availability. Well, what's that mean? Well, that's X amount of widgets more. That is, those customers that we've missed every single month going back for the past 12 months, we hit them all this month because of that extra 5%. It will be there. You must talk in terms of how the CFO talks. You have to, at some point, you have to relate that to a hard saving.
And is that one of the reasons why? I mean, we talked about plants operating or sites operating separately, and is this another reason why scalability doesn't sort of take off necessarily, even after a successful pilot, or
Yes, it can be, and there is. Let's face it as well. We're all different people. We all have different ideas, and the bigger an organisation, the more variability in terms of ideas and thought processes, and indeed likes, loves, hates, we build in. And therefore, unless you have a very clear global owner and global drive to implement a very rigid structure, it's always going to be variable. Does that make sense? Because we're dealing with people, and those companies, from my experience, that do it best, they have, this is the platform that we're putting in and the must deliverables from that, and then every site has to deliver that within a certain framework, any variability they would like to build in. The clever thing is, it goes back to the project team, and we as site one want this, this, and this, and site two goes, we weren't going to do that, but that's actually a great idea, that will work for us. So it's all globally led, it's all driven, and what you end up with is site specific, sure, but actually globally viable. You can move data around, you can compare apples with apples. They're the strongest systems from my experience.
I guess maybe we should also look at it, because we talked about lots of different elements, the sort of, the early scope workshops, we talked about the data, and we've talked about some of the metrics. But I guess if we imagine a scenario, where someone wants to introduce predictive maintenance, there's a mixture of assets, some of them are aging, some of them newer. We know maybe limited headcounts, we know, pressure in terms of skills. And of course, we know, better than me in the pharma industry, compliance pressures and things like that. So how do you even begin to start with this without being overwhelmed?
It's a great question. That is a great question. So you've just described the perfect storm, haven't you? We've got headcount and assuming budgetary limitations, we've got compliance issues, we've got aging assets. Okay, if I'm walking into that environment, let's cards on the table here. There is a lot to do there, and several different ways to approach it. My approach is as simple as criticality. What's the most critical in terms of process, and where are our bad actors? Because we need to start looking at those as soon as we can. At the same time as we're doing that, especially in the regulated environments, we need to get the basics right. We need to ensure that the team that delivers maintenance are accountable for their actions, So it's driving those two things in parallel is not easy at all, but they're absolutely critical to create a reliability roadmap that is what we're going to produce from month 2, 3, 4 onwards, and for the next 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. But it's always comes down to, where are you hurting most? With any Pareto analysis, the whole 80-20 thing, that's the whole point of it. Where are you hurting most? Where is most of your pain created? Let's focus on that. And I think sometimes as well, as engineers, we have that instinctive, I think you touched on this before, that instinctive drive to do. And indeed, operations, they tend to reward, and leadership, they tend to reward heroic action. Well, there's always perhaps going to be some requirement for that when the plant is down and nothing's running. But actually, it's also that causes the problems. We need to pause. We need to stop and just take a step back. And sometimes it's as simple as splitting your resource and keeping just a core element doing the hero stuff, whilst we in the background, right, what's the data actually telling us? Where do we actually need to focus? How are we going to codify the information in people's minds and put it down on paper so that the next time the plant's down, well, we know we're just going to do this, this, and this. Or actually, we know what caused the plant to go down last time. We're going to do this and stop it from happening again. It's always difficult to do, and it's always site specific, but generally it's that focus, criticality, ensure the compliance through accountability, and create your roadmap.
And I mean, that's really fantastically put. Even easy for someone like me to understand, right? But what I'd also say, which I've sort of picked out there as well, it's not just on one particular department or team to take the burden of this, right? Because it's not like just, maintenance I'm using it, so it's all down to you. You've mentioned lots of different areas, which I can only imagine lots of inputs, lots of collaboration, right? So these type of projects bring people together.
For sure they do. And people talk about, when they talk about predictive maintenance or maintenance best practice, everyone says, I want to implement TPM. Well, what is TPM? It's total productive maintenance. No, it's not. It's total productive manufacturing. Because actually it's a philosophy, and the whole site has to approach it from the head of site down, and to your point, yes, we're responsible for maintenance, but the whole site is responsible for equipment performance and output, and it's only when we start to work in terms of that and cross-functionally that we can be truly successful. You can have pockets of success for sure, but unless you're truly aligned and cross-functionally working, you're never going to be as successful as you could be.
Oh, fantastic. So we're coming towards the end now, but one thing I've very, very recently, you might even be the first to have introduced this to, Steve. So a couple of rapid fire questions to finish, because I was getting a bit not bored, but a bit sick of ending podcasts saying, what do you think about the next 5 years, or what's going to happen in 10 years? And we all know things are changing, and AI and etc. So what I'd rather do is just sort of try and sort of get your initial thoughts. Don't think about these too much, just what pops into your head. In terms of reliability metrics, so what's the most underrated one from your perspective? For example, like mean time to detect or maintenance schedule adherence.
All right. I'm going to be old school on this. I'm going to say quite simply availability. On an per asset basis, availability, again, tells you where your problems are. You can use all those other metrics as much as you want, but availability from a high level overview is going to be the best, I think, in terms of telling you where your bad actors are.
Fantastic. And because usually I follow these up with, as a lot of people know with these, well, in the past, when I say a final question, I usually ask lots of follow-up questions. So I'm not going to. I'm going to hold back for a future episode, hopefully. And then one final question. So in terms of one tool you won't walk around a plant without, and that doesn't have to be a physical tool. It could be, something, a mental model or approach that you have.
Right. The one tool, curiosity. If you are curious, if you are questioning, if curiosity is a positive emotion, it's a positive way of being. If you are curious when you're walking around a plant, everything else will fall out of that.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. That's fantastic. So that's the end of the lightning round, the rapid fire round. We'll see how that goes. And you didn't think about it too much, which is brilliant. That's the idea. So
yeah, which is probably why a load of people would say very different things to me. But yeah,
no, exactly. No, that's it. There's no right. That's from your experiences. It's from your experience, right? So that's exactly how it should be. But no, for today, I think we've come to the end. Again, always go so quickly, but you've shared so much insight, Steve. If someone wants to find out a bit more about what you're doing and keep up to date, where should they do that?
Well, funnily enough, Niall, my business is called Rayon Insight. You'll find me on LinkedIn under my name, Steve Lomax. You could even pop a link to my website if you want on your podcast now when it goes out. But if you find me on LinkedIn, reach out to me there. My phone number's there, my email address is there, and access to a calendar as well. Like, you want to stick half an hour in and just have a chat. I'm not going to charge you for that time. We're just going to have a conversation and see where it leads,
Yeah, no, of course. No, we will share your link to your LinkedIn profile and your website in the show notes as well, so people can catch up with you then. But yeah, no, for today, thank you, Steve. Hopefully it wasn't too traumatic your first time, but we'd love to have you back again in the future, so that'd be great.
But I enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure how well it came across, but I'd be very happy to sit down with you and do it again, Niall, for sure.
Fantastic. So yeah, thanks Steve for your participation, and thank you everyone out there for listening wherever you are, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels And find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.